Good morning, everyone. Except for it's not morning for you. It's morning for me. I'm in Del Mar, California, and most of you are in Cologne, I suspect, although you could be anywhere. So I suspect most of us are 9 hours apart. So it's bright and early for me. The sun's just coming up. And I guess it's getting ready to go down for you. But welcome to the first class of economic engineering. And this is actually the first time that I've taught online. And it's the first time, I'm somewhat handicapped because I'm sitting down. I've never taught a class sitting down. So this is going to be a new experience. I'm going to try to rearrange my computer so that the screen moves up and I can stand up. And then I'll feel more comfortable, but hopefully this will work well. So it's a little bit of experiment for me. Obviously there's going to be a learning curve and we'll just have to play it by ear and hopefully we'll all learn. The session is being recorded. And so I hope you don't mind. You certainly have the capability to maintain your privacy by you can shut off your video, you can mute your mic, you can use the chat room and send communications via chat. In fact, I'm going to pull up the participant window so I see that. Good. And actually I can have a chat window too, so I can see that. So you might want to do the same on your screens, opening up the participants and the chat. And then you can keep track of your video and audio settings as needed. For example, if your phone rings or something, then you definitely want to be on mute. And same thing, chat, you can, I suspect you're much more familiar with Zoom than I am, but you can direct your chat to me, to Mark or Kevin, to anyone else, or to everyone. And my guess is that most of your chats will be perfectly suitable for everyone, just as if we were in a regular classroom and you wanted to ask a question or something, you would ask it to the entire class. So actually, the nice thing about this is it does give you even more control about privacy. Even though it's being recorded, it really does give you the control to do what you want. And I'm perfectly happy. What I would like to do is just give everybody the access to interrupt at any moment when they have a question. And hopefully that will be manageable. If it's not manageable, then we'll do something else. But in a class like this, it shouldn't be a problem. That's what we'll do. And I am, of course, just one of 3 professors teaching this class. The other 2, Axel Ockenfels and Alex Westcamp, will be next in line. And so, but I'll do the first 4 days and then they'll do the last 4 or 5 days. So I guess 5 days. So that's the plan. It's going to be very intense, but we should all have a good time, I think, and hopefully get something good out of this. It's actually a very exciting time right now in market design. I'll mention the Nobel Prize in just a moment. But that's going to be my focus, is the market design piece. And then Axel will, or actually I guess after me is Alex, and Alex will switch and talk about matching. I'm going to talk briefly about matching, but he's going to talk much more depth about matching. And then Axel will clean up and talk about behavior, which isn't very important. So we've got sort of 3 segments. that are very much interrelated. And I hope my guess is it'll go just fine in this virtual environment. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in Cologne, but even if I was there, I wouldn't be with you anyway, because they'd put me in a little box and quarantine me for a couple of weeks. So anyway, so what's market design? Market design is establishing the rules of market interaction. It is very much in the area of economic engineering, where we're taking our economic skills and we're putting on the engineering hat, and we're reaching out to other disciplines such as computer science and operations research in order to solve real problems. So you might, I'm sure all of you are well versed in mechanism design, and mechanism design is very similar, but it's essentially, it's more theoretical. So it's sort of the mathematical foundations which we will use to address market design problems. But market design is inherently practical. We're trying to solve real practical problems. And that is, for me, that's fun. So I was actually initially trained as an engineer, or a pseudo engineer, operations research at Cornell, and then went to Stanford for my PhD, and sort of gradually made a shift towards economics over the years. But since 1993, I've been in economics departments. So I guess I'm an economist. Lots of accomplishments. We were able to improve the allocations of scarce resources. We can improve price information, which makes markets work better. And we can step in and fix market failures by reducing overall risk in the market, or enhancing competition, or addressing some other market failures that might be present. Lots of applications. I've mentioned matching, huge number of applications. Of course, Al Roth earned the Nobel Prize for his work in matching way back in 2012. And on Monday, we had the Nobel Prize for auctions. And the motivation was not just the development of the theory, but was very much an award for the bringing that theory to bear on real practical problems. And I list just a handful of the problems that are aided with good auction design and market design work. It is a very exciting time in market design, and the reason is because of the enabling technology and communication capabilities that we have today. So the technology of computation and communication enable us to do all sorts of things that we were not able to do before. And we can do them easily, relatively easily. We can do amazing things. And I'll talk about some of those. I don't know if I'll have time for too many of them in this course, but there'll be sequel courses where we will, so right after this, I'll be teaching auction theory. Well, actually, it's not called auction theory anymore. It's called auctions and market design, which is going to be a more in-depth view of both the theory and the practice. But the two are very much intertwined. And one of the things I love about market design is that the problems that we're addressing are very much of first order importance to everyday life. Some of them sort of lurk behind the scenes. Electricity markets is a good example of that, because electricity, everybody takes it for granted. It's like water. You turn on the faucet, the water comes out. You turn on the light switch and the light comes out. And you just take it for granted, and you pay a bill every month, and it's usually about the same, and you don't really think about it. But behind the scenes is one of the most complex and powerful auction enabled markets in the world. And that is, to me, it's very fascinating, and it's very it's really amazing what we can do nowadays with the computation capabilities that we have. So we're able to make these markets more and more sophisticated and more powerful, which is actually simplifying them rather than making them more complicated. It's sort of the inner workings are more and more complicated. The computers are doing a lot more work, but the humans are having to do less work. So that's sort of what it's all about. And that's sort of the future. So we're going to actually see electricity play a very important role in addressing climate change as we transition to renewable resources. And that brings a whole bunch of market design questions that need to be solved. And the good news is they are readily solvable. We can do it. And it's one of my big areas of focus right now. But the basic idea that makes the markets work can usually be expressed in just a few words. So for electricity, the two big words are that really enable the market are open access. The fact that essentially we've got this transmission grid and the regulators said, okay, well, that electricity grids can be governed by open access. And so any generator that wants to hook up to it, that's fine. And they get to trade their electricity in a open and fair market where access cannot be withheld. And that turns out to be very powerful, and it's what enabled all the restructured markets that we see around the world. And some of them have evolved to a very advanced states. The ones that are the most advanced happen to be in the United States. There's some other very fine markets in other countries, but it's definitely a process. And even in the United States, there's serious flaws that remain and have to be addressed, and they are being addressed by the market design work that people are engaged in. And so working with all the regulators, with the stakeholders, so the generators and the consumers and the industry and everyone, and it works very well. A second big idea in electricity markets is it's really obvious, but unfortunately the early designs ignored it. And I call it pay for performance. And the idea is basically that when you define a product like, this is especially relevant for capacity markets, but markets that have a capacity market, which is a long-term market to induce efficient investment and make sure there's enough resources so that electricity is reliable. Well, the idea, so many markets have this capacity market, and the initial capacity markets would basically just look at your iron in the ground. And so, what was the nameplate on your generating unit? If it said it was a gigawatt, then you got paid for a gigawatt of capacity. But in fact, the product that is being purchased by a load in a capacity market is the ability to supply energy during periods of shortage. And once you understand that that's the product, then it makes very clear that you shouldn't be rewarded based on your nameplate capacity. You should be rewarded based upon your performance in delivering electricity during periods of shortage. That's what contributes to reliability. You can have a huge nameplate and it doesn't contribute to reliability. It's the energy that gets generated during shortages that does. And so and I've been pushing this for a long time. Finally, they had problems with reliability because parties weren't taking the right actions. And they weren't taking the right actions because they weren't motivated. Because if they didn't supply during shortage, there was no penalty. But now all the markets in the US have very strong penalties and rewards for doing more than your obligation and penalties for doing less. So that's the simple idea of pay for performance. If you perform, you get paid. If you don't perform, you don't get paid. Very simple idea. Communications markets, what really revolutionized communications is the introduction of auctioning the spectrum, because that enabled competition. We always had monopoly communications for a very long time, but with mobile communications, competition was enabled, but it really didn't become a promising reality until we adopted spectrum auctions in the early 90s. And now that's been adopted everywhere in the world and has been a huge area of innovation and was a key element that was cited in the Nobel Prize on Monday. A second idea that I've been pushing is the idea of open access in communications markets as well. And this one hasn't taken hold yet in too many places, but just a few. But the idea here is, again, that some segment of the network capacity, in my mind, should be reserved with open access provision so that anybody can buy or sell throughput at competitive terms in a transparent market. And that idea is one that's still unfolding. I think we'll eventually get there as the markets mature. But right now, we're actually doing reasonably well with the oligopoly structure that we currently have. But it's an area where we can see more improvement and have more competition and more innovation in communications, which of course is extremely important to everything else we do in the economy. Transportation, 2 words, price congestion. So here we have, again, a network where, in this case, millions of people are making use of the network, much like electricity. And in the major urban centers, there's a lot of congestion that's causing serious harm to lots of people. So people are delayed for extended periods. There's much less throughput in the urban centers. There's a lot of emissions that is very problematic for people's health. And of course, there's a lot of CO2 emissions as well. So all kinds of emissions. But one of the big things that we haven't yet effectively addressed is the managing that congestion. And just like we manage congestion in an electricity market, and we have to in electricity, because otherwise the lines would melt, generators would be damaged, consumer equipment would be damaged. It's absolutely essential in the context of electricity to address congestion. In transportation, it's not absolutely essential, but it would sure make everybody's life much better if we did. And we have the capability to measure road use and can price road use just the way we do in our wholesale electricity markets. So this is an innovation that is emerging. There's some places where, at least for some segments of the road network, congestion is priced in real time, but it's the exception rather than the rule. So again, we'll see a lot of innovation in this area over the next 10, 20 years. There'll be huge innovation, especially with the introduction of electric vehicles, very high penetration of electric vehicles, which will happen over the next 10 to 20 years. Climate policy, I can do climate policy in 2 words, price carbon. It's that simple. And we'll, actually, Axel's going to talk more about carbon pricing than I am. But yeah, in short, it's the solution that's obvious to everyone, to every economist. And it's just the gains from it are, the price instrument is especially powerful in this setting because it can impact efficiently billions of decisions that consumers, industry, everyone is making. And with just one simple number, the carbon price, that then can achieve the ambitious goals that society has of, well below 2 degrees Celsius. If we don't price carbon, we will not achieve that ambitious goal, in my mind. Now, pricing carbon is not the only answer. There's other market failures that warrant, there's certain economies that make standards very useful in some circumstances. There's other market failures that have to be addressed in different ways. But the primary instrument that's going to drive innovation and emission reductions is the price instrument, in my mind. And it's also a very useful method of establishing a metric for international cooperation on this issue, which of course is essential. We look at financial securities. This one's a little bit more subtle, but in my work, I would sum it up in 3 words: make time discrete. Switch from the continuous trading, which is the norm today, to frequent batch auctions. And the reason that I'm a big advocate of making time discrete and making price and quantity continuous is that in doing so, the market becomes much, much more efficient. Right now, we have huge investments by the market participants and the exchanges, but especially the market participants, on speed technology. And the exchanges are selling speed technology, like through co-location and high frequency data feeds. And they're making money doing this. The high frequency traders are learning how to snipe stale quotes and learning how to front run the orders of fundamental investors. But that doesn't bring any social value. It makes the trading game much more complicated. And there's actually very simple solutions that would make the trading of financial securities much more powerful. And in fact, the sort of innovations that are needed are just the sort of innovations that we have already seen in electricity markets. And that's one reason that I got involved in the financial side, is that I'm seeing the power of these innovations in electricity, where we can trade efficiently much more complicated products in much more powerful auction methods than what takes place in financial markets. So, what's the problem? If all these problems are readily solved with a few words, why don't the market designers just tell folks this and we'll get it done? And the answer is it's very hard to change the status quo. There's lots of parties, stakeholders in the process that are benefiting from the inefficiencies of the status quo. And so when I go to the regulator and say, I can save you $10 billion, the Wall Street guys go to the regulator and say, hey, that's my $10 billion. And they're actually very good at sending their message to the regulator. And I am not so well capitalized as they are. And so in the end, with the regulator, it's quite typical for these distributional issues to trump the efficiency issues. So the regulator knows what's efficient, but they have a very hard time taking away some money from incumbents. And that's the sad reality. But in one sense, it's not so sad, because if we could just go out and just tell folks what's efficient, we could fix all these problems in a week. And then what would we do with the rest of our lives? Sit around on the beach? It get kind of dull after a while. So, the reality is all these problems, they're obvious, the answers are obvious, but getting them implemented is a lot of work. And it's very important work. And we actually learn an enormous amount from that process. And so, sometimes the market designers are initially wrong that there are some important subtle issues that need to be addressed. Often these issues are around equity. But so it's not just about efficiency, but even us market designers, we learn about what efficiency means. So we can improve our notion of efficiency sometimes through engaging actively with the stakeholders. So the process is actually very, very useful, and I think it's fun. I enjoy it, and I suspect many of you would. So here's the famous quote from Milton Friedman on the enormous inertia of the status quo, and essentially saying what I just said, that the problem is that change is very difficult. There's parties that are going to be harmed from it, that are losing from those inefficiencies. And so what we need to do as market designers is sort of build the plans and work out all those tricky details into a quite well-established proposal with lots of evidence that it works and can be implemented. And then when there's an opportunity, when there's a crisis, then the door opens a little bit and we can slide our proposal under the door and get it implemented. And what's really nice is all these ideas can be implemented anywhere. So, and this is really because of technology too. The technology moves both computation and communication. Those technologies move everywhere in the world. So it doesn't matter whether you're the most developed country in the world or the least developed, you still are going to have some level of access. Maybe it won't be 5G technology, but you've got 4G, or maybe you don't even have 4G, you've got 3G. But that provides a level of communication that still can support very sophisticated market methods. And so we're seeing that. And then the nice thing is, if you have trouble getting something implemented in Germany because of this tyranny of the status quo, you can find an opportunity somewhere else. Maybe they'll implement it in Singapore. So you get it implemented in Singapore, and it works beautifully, and you've got now further evidence that it works in the field. And so you come back to Germany and they still give you a hard time. So you go to France and get it implemented in France. And then, after a while, eventually Germany says, oh, now, yeah, there's enough evidence. Now I'm convinced, and then they do it. So, sometimes Germany will be at the forefront and want to implement something first. And so it could be that Germany's the area of opportunity, but it's really nice that we can take our plans anywhere. And so that's a good thing. So that was a very broad overview. Let me first define what economic engineering is. And so it's basically, and this term was first introduced by Al Roth, but who also, like me, is an engineer that got gradually converted to being an economist. So he actually, his PhD is in operations research, and but he moved into economics, and now, of course, it's in an economics department at Stanford. So it's the science of designing institutions and mechanisms that align individual incentives and behavior with the underlying goals. So the first focus is goals. What are you trying to accomplish? That's always my starting point. Then the second is, okay, now we've got our toolkit, and we're basically going to be able to design the institution, the way the decisions are made, the way goods are priced, the way goods are allocated, the form of communication, what's the information policy? All these things we get to design in order to promote the underlying goal. And what we need to recognize is that there's often going to be some humans involved in this process. And so we have to address incentive issues and behavioral issues. And fortunately, all the tools that we have through the development of game theory on the theoretical side, behavioral economics on the behavioral side, and then economics very broadly, primarily from game theory, developing our understanding of incentives. So as economists, we've got a really great toolkit, but then we have to reach out to the computer scientists and operations researchers if we're solving really difficult economic problems, because we're going to need very powerful computation in order to solve these problems. So we reach out to them for that, and then typically there'll be a lot of domain expertise that we'll need. So if in electricity, then you're going to be working with the electrical engineers who understand how electricity networks work and so on. And that's a big part of the process. Or in transport, you're going to be working with the transportation engineers who understand the properties of road networks or electric vehicles or regular vehicles, all these things. So there's Al, and he has a very nice paper that if you haven't read yet, you should definitely read, his 2002 paper in Econometrica, which basically lays this out as the economist is engineer. And it's really quite lovely. And one of the arguments is that when we're solving real problems, and we want to make our theory incredibly powerful and useful, then you may get some power from theory itself, but really you're not able to solve any problems unless you're listening to practice and thinking about applying those ideas in practice. So for me, it's a very fun way to not only solve real problems, but and have more of an impact in the world, but to improve. It certainly improves my theory skills enormously, because I recognize where the theory falls short and where we need to develop the theory some more. And so then I can help contribute to more powerful theories. And for me, that's a lot of fun. And what it's done is it's really brought a new element to the economic literature, which is this literature that's codifies the ideas that this extension of theories into the practical domain, and then the economist gets to see all these how the theory can be applied and how the theory needs to be developed to better address the questions at hand. So, to me, it's really nice. And we can split this process into two components: the institutional detail, which is all the market rules and and exactly what's needed, um, which is essentially all the machinery that's going to solve the economic problem. And then there's behavior, and behavior is a whole separate component. It's how important it is depends upon the application. So when I'm thinking of electricity markets, and typically most domains, it's actually always both. If we think about electricity markets, the wholesale electricity market, you might think, okay, these guys behavior is not such a big deal. We just have to give them the tools for an efficient market. And then they're all sophisticated grown-ups playing the same game again and again, day in, day out. So they have lots of opportunity for learning. They're going to be very well motivated because the stakes are extremely high. So they're quite sophisticated. So behavior may not play such a huge role there. And it's just really giving the machinery of an efficient auction. But then if I'm also thinking about electricity, then if I think about, well, what about the retail side? Because the wholesale market, of course, is meaningless without the retail side, which is providing the service to consumers. And here's where in electricity, there's been, under the monopoly days, there was no innovation, there's nothing. You got the bill, it was 40 euros a month, and you paid it, and that was it. And so the consumer was kind of irrelevant, and you had no choice. You had to pay it. That's the way it goes. But the future is going to have to, with all these intermittent resources, we're going to have more responsive demand. So we have to balance supply and demand in real time. And when we've got all this intermittent resources on the supply side, an important component of price formation is going to have to come from the consumer side. So we're going to see more and more importance of the consumer going forward. And that brings in the behavioral side, because these are less sophisticated parties, stakes are much smaller. How are these humans going to react in this particular problem? Transportation is the same thing. It's, I can lay out this great model to address congestion pricing and manage congestion in the transport network. But a very important element of that is going to be, how do consumers respond to prices? And in electricity, it's a little bit easier for me to just assume that, well, that's going to be addressed by the algorithms that are controlling the charging of your car and the use of your air conditioner and the heating of your room and so on. And so the consumer still will be fairly passive. They'll be quite responsive to price, but the response will come through algorithms that help the consumer. In transportation, the consumer is going to have to make some decisions in response to prices. It will still be very much aided by algorithms, as the consumer is aided today in transport. If you're driving through a congested network, you will typically go to Google Maps and see what your options are and how long it's going to take, and whether it's better to take the tram or the car or walk or the bike or the train, what have you. You have lots of information with which to make that decision. And of course, it would be trivial for Google to read what the real-time prices were for these various routes and activities and factor that into your decision-making as well. Okay, so what we try to do is identify, first, what's our economic problem, what's our goal, and then how can we address how can we solve this economic problem as simply as possible? And the reality is, a lot of these problems are quite complex, both from a behavioral side and institutional side. And so we really have to work pretty hard at understanding all these things when coming together with a proposal that can be effective and be implemented. So another thing that Al did, which was extremely useful, is make broad use, and many other economists did as well, make broad use of experiments in the market design domain. And of course, Cologne has special expertise in this area. And that's really great because the experiments are incredibly useful to test drive a proposal and refine the proposal so that it then can be successfully implemented. So I often find in my work that it's, I'll write out the market design, I'll think about it a lot, I'll prove its theoretical properties, and the regulator will be unimpressed. They'll be like, okay, but that's, yeah, I see your theorem, but, big deal. What's much more powerful is actually showing them that, it's not just a theorem. I can test the theorem in the laboratory and it's actually true. Or I might find, well, yeah, in that theorem, you were right. The theorem's wrong. This is what plays out in the lab. And actually, so we can actually improve the design by better understanding the behavior from what we learned in the lab. And we always learn things. So when I'm advising bidders in participating in very complex markets, I always do mock auctions. So it'll just be either spectrum auctions or some other auction. Right now I'm doing an auction for rural subsidies to provide broadband communications in a rural area that's non-economic. We're starting an auction in just a few days in the United States that's going to allocate $16 billion. And yesterday, I had a mock auction with our team, and it's just incredibly powerful what you learn in the mock auction about the process, the bidding strategy, how everything works. So experimentation is very important. And again, we're in this age where the cost of doing experiments is falling dramatically. So these are lab experiments, but Google and the other big tech companies do, literally millions of experiments all the time, pretty much on a daily basis to optimize what they're doing. And why do they do it? Because it's effective and because it's incredibly inexpensive. And this is sort of the revolution that we're experiencing in with data and computation. And so there's this whole new category of data science. With basically people that can understand data and make good use of it. And what all the big tech companies found is that they actually can learn a lot from economists about how to understand what the data is saying and how to design experiments to better understand. So now all the big tech companies have economics groups. They typically have a chief economist and then a whole group of economists that are working throughout the organization. And that is, typically these are PhD economists, so very tooled up. And it's a good thing. Maybe not always. I mean, these powerful tools can be used for both good and evil, as any is true of any powerful tool. But most of it's for the good, providing very powerful services for consumers at very low cost. But there certainly there can be a dark side, and the politics of today certainly illustrate that dark side. So it's something to be on the alert about. I promised to mention the Nobel Prize. It was very exciting for me at 4:40 a.m. on Monday when I first learned about the award to Bob Wilson and Paul Milgrom. Bob and Paul are two people that I've worked with for 40 years. I had the pleasure and privilege of being a student of Bob Wilson's in the early 80s, 80 to 84, which was a very wonderful time for me. But I've worked with Bob ever since that time for the last 40 years, and we continue to write papers together, and he's just contributed so much to my life. And that's true with all of his students. I was on a call on Monday with about 100 students of Bob Wilson and Paul Milgrom. Paul is very similar. Both of them bring out the best in the people they interact with. And they're both extremely brilliant in complementary but different ways. And they've contributed so much to the market design area over the years. So this was a really great thing, and I was so pleased to see them receiving this acknowledgement. So I had to add them. So they're right behind me there. This is the 2020. My pictures and my image is in the way, but you can see I'm having trouble because I'm running out of space. All the Nobel Prizes that are awarded for economists doing work that's quite relevant to market design, and it's to me it's just amazing, but you can just see wandering around here the important contributions to, we've got Hersani and Nash and Selton up at the top left, fundamental contributions to game theory that's proved so important. You have Vernon Smith with experimental work, and Dick Thaler too for experimental and behavioral economics, Kahneman for behavioral, Herb Simon for understanding sort of the limits of rational models and recognizing that there's more to it. Ostrom for understanding how cooperation can be promoted in institutions where social dilemmas appear. Bob Aumann and Tom Schelling for their very important contributions to game theory in really fundamental ways. Schelling is Bob Aumann, he's directly contributing to the foundational theory. Tom Schelling didn't make any contributions. He had no theorems. He had no contributions to the fundamental theorem directly, but he had huge impact indirectly by critiquing what the theorists were doing, by clearly explaining the limitations of the theory and in such a compelling way that it got it's basically a kick in the butt of the theorists. You're like, why are you doing this stuff? You got, this is what the real issues are. Work on these. And that's what Schelling did. And it led to basically getting us out of our little trap and expanding the horizons in which we explored. So, starting to look seriously at information issues and commitment issues and the tension between conflict and cooperation in richer ways. So, that was really a big contribution. So basically you can contribute to the literature in a variety of different ways. And we all have different talents to make different contributions. And then Bill Vickery. So William Vickery, he's, I consider Vickery the grandfather of auctions. So he was really the first to study auctions, and he did auctions, solving auctions properly, finding an equilibrium in this game with incomplete information at a time when the theory of games of incomplete information hadn't yet been written. Harsanyi hadn't yet written his papers in the late 60s when Vickery was doing his work in the early 60s and late 50s. So that was, I think, quite the accomplishment. And then Bob Wilson came along in the later 60s and said, this is pretty neat. Vickery's got this very nice analysis of private value auctions where everybody knows what their value is and it doesn't depend on what anybody else knows. But we've got other areas like, say, oil tracts, where in fact the whole issue is about we don't know what the value is. We all make estimates of what that value is. The value is roughly the same for all of us, but we're competing in this auction, none of us knowing what the actual value is, all estimating. And that has a huge, and then solving for the equilibrium in that environment. And that, of course, has a huge impact on behavior in the rational behavior in the auction. And of course, it was found that in fact, people weren't initially bidding rationally in these auctions. They were overbidding because they weren't discounting their bids enough, recognizing the winner's curse. And as a result, they were paying prices that were above the realized value. And so eventually the guys bidding on oil tracts figured this out and started shading their bids much more substantially. And but Bob was the first to introduce that model. And then Paul came along in the late 70s and early 80s and developed a model that combined both the private value and the common value elements of Vickery and Wilson into more of a unified theory. And that was one of the main reasons. Paul's done so much work that it's hard to point to one thing, but that certainly is. So Vickery is the grandfather of auctions. Bob is the father of auctions, and Paul is the first son of auctions in my book. And then there's others here too. Of course, Al Roth and Shapley for their work in matching and the development of the market design area. And then Jean Tirole for understanding the regulation of market power and also very much jumping in and thinking about the details, bringing very fine theory to understand practical details. And of course, I have to mention Holmstrom and Hart. Bengt Holmstrom is also a student of Bob Wilson. Paul Milgram's a student of Bob Wilson. Al Ross, a student of Bob Wilson. The reality for me is Bob's got 3 students with the Nobel Prize. So, if you don't have a Nobel Prize and you're a Bob Wilson student, you don't even make the podium. It's pretty amazing what he's, and this goes back to them bringing out the best from their students. And then Roger Myerson, I have to mention. So Maskin, of course, and Hurwitz are very important, but Myerson has the strongest connection to auctions. Maskin does too, but Myerson's, of course, his work on the optimal auction, and his work we're actually going to spend the most time with in this overview course. But Myerson's analysis was essentially building enormously on the power of Vickrey's initial analysis, and really developing the mechanism design tool that we use so effectively in our market design work. So that's the broad history of the Nobel Prizes that are most relevant to this area. But what's nice to see for me is this isn't just some sidelight that is a few people are working on. This, I think you'd have to say, this is very much mainstream economics, or something's wrong with the Nobel Committee. And I like to think that the committee is doing a great job, and it's just that there's a lot of very powerful, important work that we're able to bring to bear. So, as I said, market design, you want to start with the goal or the objective. And of course, the objectives are going to vary based upon what the particular application is. And, but I like to think of these 4 objectives as ones that arise almost everywhere. And so they've worked really well for me, which is why I mention them now. They're sort of generic objectives that you should always have in the back of your head when you're thinking about different design options. Efficiency, of course, is the most obvious to an economist. That's just, of course, efficiency. Let's maximize social welfare. That's a good thing. So that one's easy. Simplicity is remarkably important in practice. And it's, it really is something that you do have to take seriously. It's so easy for us, given our experiences and our flexibility with complex models, to not recognize the benefits of simplicity. But actually, if you look if we look back at the prior slide and all those Nobel prizes, you'll look back and see, oh, okay, he got the prize for this. Boy, that's obvious. I mean, all of them, you look back at what they did, and they're all things that, yeah, I understand that. That's I can explain that to my mom, no problem. And that's sort of the way it is. So, it's the simple, powerful ideas that are what has lasting value. So you can see it that way. But in practice, you'll actually see it by, it just improves behavior often enormously when something's understandable. And you'd be surprised that if you're clever enough in how you design products and other elements of the proposal, you can have a high level of simplicity, even in very complicated environments. So electricity, for example, has it's got this central optimization, which is maximize social welfare subject to constraints, which is basically just the efficiency objective. But being able to state what the objective is so crisply and rigorously brings simplicity to the whole rest of the apparatus, because it has this very tight logic that's hard for the market participants to weasel around. And so I actually think you can do really complex stuff with some really simple, powerful ideas. Transparency is incredibly important in good market design. So I push for markets that are as transparent as possible. That doesn't mean that you necessarily want to have just everybody gets to see everything all the time, because there is some need to, especially in instances where the competition is fairly weak, you need to address potential failures because of market power. And so often that's done by limiting the information to what's really essential for efficiency, but is not that helpful in supporting collusive arrangements, let's say. So it's an issue that one looks at carefully in terms of the information policy, but by and large, a high level of transparency is a wonderful thing. And we see this most in, I mean, this is a good contrast between electricity markets and financial markets. Electricity markets in the United States, after 90 days and sometimes 30 days, all bids are released. So you have full transparency after a period of time. In financial markets, so let's say treasury auctions, the bids are never released ever. So you can go and ask them, I'd like to see the bids from 90 years ago. And they'll tell you, I'm sorry, we can't give you that information. If we gave you that information, it might harm, you know, that's confidential information of the bidders containing, you know, their business secrets, and we couldn't give you that, which is just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And so in financial markets, this lack of transparency leads to a lot of misbehavior. And we see it every microsecond of every microsecond in financial markets. The regulator can't see it, but we know it's there. So, and the final one is fairness. And this brings us to the equity issues, are very important. And this is the one where the economists have historically scored the worst. You know, they're just jumping in and saying efficiency, efficiency, and not taking seriously the equity issues. So equity is going to, that's the good way to get killed. You just, you aren't going to be able to influence people if you don't address equity. So and you have to be careful, because if you start out and say, okay, I'm going to do, no, I probably should put it at the top of the list, but since economists have less to say about equity, that's why we tend to put it at the bottom of the list. But it really is of first order importance. And you have to be very careful not to spend all your time talking about efficiency, and then you say, oh, well, equity, oh, sure, yeah, we can push the money around any way you like. You know, that just doesn't do it. That's not enough. So anyway, I just mentioned that as a, you know, that's an overall issue that you'll want to keep in mind as you engage, if, you know, should you engage and find this interesting and further engage in market design activities. Okay, so now, what I want to do is just actually, now this is where I turn over to, did I get all these slides in? Yeah, this is where I thought I had there's one slide that's missing, which is to introduce, so now we're stepping into the logistics, and Mark and Kevin, unless I've got the wrong ones, did I?
Looks somewhat different.
Oh, there, oh, maybe I had some extra slides. Okay, here it is. Okay, so yeah, this is the slide I was expecting to see. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over now to Mark, but Mark and Kevin are two very talented PhD students that are going to be helping Axel and Alex and myself with the course. And so I will let Mark talk about the logistics.
Thanks. Yeah, may I just go ahead and start? So my name is Mark, and as Peter said, I'm a PhD student of Professor Ockenfels, and together with Kevin, I'm the teaching assistant for this course. And yeah, currently I'm involved in research around high frequency trading and financial market design. Actually, Peter already talked a little bit about it, and I think you will hear about it later in the course as well. So maybe Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so my name is Kevin. I'm also a PhD student for a few years now, actually at Axis Chair. And yeah, I'm mostly an experimental economist, I would say, not so much a theorist, but I also do work in the auctions area, in matching, in reputation systems. And yeah, Mark and me will take care basically of the class after the lecture is over, and therefore we just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves and also to tell you a bit about the logistics and also give you the opportunity to ask if you have any questions. And I think Mark will start with the logistics.
Yeah, maybe you've already seen that in Ilias. We have a folder called organizational, and in this folder there are two documents. So the first one is the instructions, and I would recommend you to read the instructions carefully. It's actually what we're going to tell you in the next minutes is written down there. So if you don't understand something, please read the instructions. And yeah, the instructions will also tell you that the grading in this course is based on a term paper. The term paper should have approximately 5 pages plus the references, and the submission deadline is the 7th February, but 21, obviously. So there's like a mistake on the slides. It's not 2020, I'm sorry. It's the 7th of February 21. And maybe what's more pressing is the application deadline. So if you want to receive credits for this course and you want to take the course, there are actually two things you need to do until the 30th of October, and this time 2020, so this date here is correctly. First, you need to sign up for the examination on CLIPS. So I think for the master students, you already know that. And I think we also have PhD students. I think the first thing does not apply for you. So PhD students don't have to register for the examination on CLIPS. But the second thing all of you need to do, and that is to send an application to Kevin, where you just enter your name. Maybe you can let us know whether you're a PhD student or a master student. And then you can also let us know on which topic you would like to write your term paper and whether you would like to receive bonus points. So these are the two things that you need to do until this 30th of October here. And as I said, that's the most pressing. So if you would like to take the course for credit points, please apply until the 30th of October. And I think Kevin is now telling you a little bit more about the topics and the bonus points.
Yes. Okay. So regarding the topics, you will find basically an application form in Ilias, and there will be a list with somewhat like 20 topics. And you can either choose to take a topic of this list, or you could also suggest an own topic. If you would like to suggest an own topic, this should be related, of course, to the lecture. So we would like you then to describe this new design or engineering problem and also relate to specific parts of the lecture. If you want to choose a topic, then you just take a look at the list, and within the list you can number your preferences, but the whole application is very detailedly described also on Ilias. But how it basically works is you give your preference on the 20-something list, and then we will, after that, use some kind of algorithm, which is also described there to match your preferences to the actual topics. And then when I received all of the topics, then I will write all of you an email with the topic you have finally received. On top of the term paper, you have also the option to receive bonus points. And you can receive bonus points for two different things. So you can get one step of bonus point, which means that your grade is just one step higher for giving a presentation on your topic. And this presentation should be about 15 minutes. And you can get also another step for your grade if you're going to lead the discussion of another student. And here we will take care that your discussion partner is closely related with respect to your own topic, so that you don't have to get in a very different field of research. And then you basically have to prepare a few questions, and that we will have something to talk about after the presentation. So basically, this is just very roughly what is going to happen. But as Mark already told you, this is also very detailedly described on Ilias. But if you have any questions right now, you can also just ask. But also you can just at any point in time just write me or Mark an email. Our email addresses are also here on the slide, and then we may help if there are any issues. I don't know. Did I miss something, Mark?
No, I think that sounds good. Yeah, as you said, I think all relevant documents for this course are provided at Ilias. And yeah, if you'd like to have an appointment, so if you want to discuss your own idea or the presentation or how to lead a discussion or something like that, you can just contact us, and then we make an appointment for an office hour. And I think we have like one more slide. Yeah, so here is actually, I think you all know that from clips. So here are the dates for the lectures. And as you know, we start with Peter talking about market design, followed by Alexander Westkamp talking about matching, and Axel Ockenfels talking about behavioral economic engineering, and maybe also something about the exercise sessions. So they will take place from the 12th November to the 17th of December. And there's a mistake in the first bullet point. So it shouldn't be the 15th of October. It should be the 12th of November. And we reserved the first exercise session for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please send us them. And then in the first exercise session, we will discuss these questions. And then the presentations and the discussions will start at the 19th of November. So you should have enough time to prepare your presentation and discussion, even if you end up starting. So yeah, that should actually be enough time.
Yeah, and since it's only for bonus points, this is kind of, you're not forced to do it, it's just voluntary, but we would highly recommend giving a presentation also to get feedback for your term paper afterwards. So we highly recommend doing this.
Sorry, one question.
Sure.
So at the presentation, the 2 to 3 papers we should present there concerning our topic, are those the papers you listed on the application file, or shall we search on our own for related research work?
I mean, on the application file, these are just suggestions. So these are some papers to start with, but you don't have to use them. And in your presentation, you can present you can present 2 to 3 papers and also state your strategy for the term paper. So if you would like to go in a little bit different direction using other papers or only one paper and additional papers, then you can do so as well.
Thanks.
Okay.
Good. Okay, great. So yeah, and if there's any questions, then by all means reach out to Mark and Kevin about the logistics. You could try reaching out to me, but if you reach out to me, I'll just send it to Mark and Kevin, because I know nothing about logistics, or I don't even know how to spell the system that you're using. What is it, Clips or what? Yeah, so I'm hopeless. So sorry about that. But fortunately, Mark and Kevin are not hopeless. They know exactly what they're doing. Good. Yeah, and we, here we have some literature that, I would definitely put the things there in the must read, and the actually must read. You should definitely read these. And one of them actually, the paper that Axel and I are involved with Chen and List it just came out just a few days ago. So it's hot off the press. Why does it say, oh, that just hasn't been updated? hopefully so the paper, if you get the paper from, so Mark or Kevin, if you get the paper from my website, then that's the printed version. It came out a few days ago.
Ah, I see. Yeah, we will update this.
Yeah. So you can put that in the clips or wherever, somewhere. Okay, good. And yeah, and then there's just a few other papers. You know, we could list 1 million papers here. So the literature is vast. You know, if you asked me to focus on auctions, I could easily list 1,000 papers. If we broadened it to behavior, then there'd be another 15,000 papers. So, you know, as you know, there's just an infinite amount of stuff out there, and we're just trying to give you a little bit of guidance on some of the ones that are especially relevant to the ideas that we're talking about. That's all. But I would look at this as more of a sampling rather than any attempt at being exhaustive. And of course, as you're looking at questions and areas and you're thinking about your paper, then you'll definitely want to look at the literature more broadly and find things that are especially relevant to the particular question that you're engaging in. Good.
Okay, so Peter, I have to leave now.
Oh,
so
sure, yeah.
Any further questions by anyone, shoot me an email, shoot Mark an email, and enjoy your first class. And yeah, then we will see you the latest during the presentations.
Good.
Right.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin. And Mark, feel free to drop off whenever you want too. I know you heard this last year, so so just do whatever you want at any time.
I think I will stay a little longer, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. I'll try to entertain you in some way. Good. So I'm just going to touch on matching. And the reason I'm doing this is that well, it's an important area in market design, but a reason not to do it is because Alex is going to talk about it in just a couple days. But I want to do it now because there's a tight connection between matching and auctions, and it's fairly subtle. So, and I'm not sure how much he emphasizes that. So when you're thinking, when I'm talking about auctions, you should be thinking, oh, well, this matching stuff's related. And there's a very nice paper by Paul Milgram and others that makes the strong connection between matching and auctions. And I think that's fascinating, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to present the simplest matching very quickly. So we've got N agents. This is going to be the simplest case, one-sided matching. Couldn't be simpler. And it's one-sided in that only one side of the market has preferences. Each of N agents owns a house and has strict preferences over all the houses. So that's the application that you should be thinking of. It doesn't need to be houses, but let's just to be it concrete, we'll make it houses. And the question is, can the agents benefit from swapping? That is, can there be some, so we've got this closed economy with these N people, N houses, and can we reshuffle the houses in such a way that people are happier? So I want to suggest one possible way of doing this. And the reason I suggest this one possible way is that this turns out to be a really good way to do this. It basically comes to the right answer. So it's a particular algorithm, top trading cycles. And an algorithm, it also will get you thinking about algorithms, which is good because an auction is an algorithm. And there are different types of auctions and are enabled by different algorithms. But algorithms are really important because of our enabling technology that I've emphasized throughout. Communications and computation. So, so this is increasingly important, and everything that the consumers are more and more going to be interacting with complex systems that are made manageable and in fact enjoyable by very sophisticated algorithms that are taking their more limited inputs and translating them into some sort of decision-making and behavior in response to this complex system. So this is just a very simple algorithm. So let's do this. Top trading cycles. Each owner points to her most preferred house, possibly your own. Okay, there's the N houses, and each of us is just going to point to the one we like the best. It might be our own house, it might be somebody else's house. Fine. Each house points back to its owner. So my house is pointing to me. That creates a directed graph. One of the things that we like to do with directed graphs is identify cycles. Because it's a finite, so we got N houses and N people, it's a finite graph, and that means that a cycle exists. And you'll see what a cycle is. It's basically a chain that comes back to itself. If I'm pointing to myself, then that actually is, if I'm pointing in my own house, then that's a cycle by itself. But because it's finite, we have to have a cycle. Because of strict preference, each owner is in at most one cycle. And that means, and so the algorithm, what it's going to do is give each owner in a cycle the house she points to, and then remove her and that house from the market. And then if there's unmatched owners and houses, then we do it again. So we just repeat until and notice there's always going to exist a cycle. So I'm always going to be able to remove somebody. And since there's a finite number of them, eventually I'll eliminate everybody and the algorithm will end. So that's it. But what are the properties of this top trading cycles algorithm? Very nice. The top trading cycle outcome is a core allocation. So we're able to prove that no subset of owners can make its members better off by an alternative assignment within the subset. And that's very nice, because if there was a subset of owners that could do better among themselves, then they would have an incentive to do just that, to step away from this top trading cycle solution and just act on their own. So the fact that it's a core allocation means that there is no subset that can be better off with themselves. The top trading cycle outcome is unique. So not only do we have this core allocation, but it's unique, and we found it, and we always find it. And then the real kicker is it's strategy proof. That is, everyone wants to report correct. I had everybody pointing to their favorite house. Well, that's all well and good if we know everybody's preferences. But if we don't know everybody's preferences, and of course we don't, then we better make sure that the algorithm, in the algorithm, people have the incentive to point to their preferred house, because otherwise the desirable properties are not held. So this being strategy proof is very important here. No one can benefit by lying about her preferences. So you can see why I presented the algorithm. These are really nice, and they're all very easy to prove. But it would be, the world would be so easy if we had such powerful results. Uniqueness, core allocation, and strategy proof all in one. Wow, that's just amazing. Well, let's see an example. Okay, so here, now I've got my houses and I've got my people. And there you can see my preferences. So person 1 values house 3 the most. So person 1 should be pointing to now let me get over here. So person 1 should be pointing to 3. Person 2 should be pointing to 4, and so on. So there we are, each pointing to our own. And now each house is going to point to their own person, the current owner. And now we're going to look for a cycle. So the cycle is going to be where it comes back onto itself. And you can see here in green, here we have a cycle. And there, as I said, there's a very basic result of finite directed graphs, that every finite directed graph has at least one cycle. So there's a cycle. And now we're going to be able to, which basically involves 1 getting 3's house and 3 getting 1's house. So they basically swap. Okay, so then once we do that, then the market's made smaller. We eliminate 1 and 3. We make the allocation, and we've now got a smaller problem here. So here's our smaller problem. Each points, do the same algorithm, each points to their preferred house. 2 points to house 4, 4 points to house 2, and then the houses point to their owner. And lo and behold, we've got another cycle. And 2 and 4 swap houses, and now we're done. So, this is a very simple example, but it's, even if you didn't know the theorems, you would be able to, do a few examples and see, this looks like it's always working out, and then think, oh, maybe I should prove a theorem, and then you could prove the very deep theorems that the cycle always exists, and then of course once you've got that, then the convergence of the algorithm is immediate when you have finite, and you're always eliminating somebody at every stage. So that's it. So basically, one-sided matching is super easy, and it's going to be a little bit more exciting when we have two-sided matching, where both sides of the market care about. What made that so simple before is the houses didn't care about their, they just always pointed to their owner. They had no other preference. So with two-sided matching, it's convenient to think of men and women, and the, in the traditional problem, in any event. So I'm going to do that. So we've got these two groups, men and women, and let's say for simplicity, we've got n of each. And then again, we're wondering who should be matched to whom. So again, we'll have strict preferences. Each has an ordered list, essentially ranking the various others, but the list doesn't have to be complete. So there might be that you actually, there's people that you would actually, you'd rather be single than paired with them, and so you don't have them on the list at all. A matching between men and women is going to be just a particular allocation where we match men and women together. But again, as I said, that it's fine if they choose to be single, that's fine too. And we'll say that there's a blocking pair, a man and a woman. It's a blocking pair if the man and woman prefer to be together, then who they're assigned to. Okay, and we would, and as I say here, if you're a single, so X max, X can be a blocking pair by themselves as a single if he or she prefers being alone than being paired with who they're paired with. So, and we'd like to find a stable match, which is going to avoid any blocking pairs. So if we had a blocking pair, that means there's a man and a woman that prefer each other to who they're paired with. And they then could just say, let's get together and forget about this matching that Crampton suggested. We want to just get together, and then the match would be unstable because they would go off and leave, and that might mess everything up. It would certainly mess up the match that I proposed. So we don't want that. We want to find a stable match. So let's again have an example. And this example is, it's good. It illustrates a lot of things. So I'm going to use the Snoopy characters. And so the women are Lucy, Peppermint, Marcy, and Sally. And the men are Charlie, Linus, Schroeder, and Franklin. And so what are their preferences? Well, here are their lists. So everybody has a list. That's great. And you can see the lists are incomplete. Some of them only, even though there's 4 on the opposite side, some of them only are interested in 2 or 3. Only Marcy has complete preferences. So again, we're going to have an algorithm that is going to try to find a stable match, but let's just look at one particular match. So here's a match. So is this stable? And we just have to look at the preferences. Is there any pair that prefer each other to who they're paired with? And if we look carefully, so let's look at Linus and Peppermint being paired together. Notice that Peppermint isn't even on Linus's list. And so that's definitely not a stable match, because Peppermint would say, I'm just going to be single. I don't want to be paired with Linus. So that breaks down. So let's try fixing it. So we have to do some switching around. So maybe this is a stable match. But again, this is problematic because Linus and Marcy, look at them. They're not together, but they would much prefer to get together. So Marcy is Linus's first choice. And Marcy is paired right now with Schroeder, her last choice. And Linus is the third choice, but that's certainly better than last choice. So they want to get together. So that wasn't stable. So we changed it again, and boom. Now, if you look really carefully, you'll find that this is stable. There is no pair that are better off together than they are in this particular allocation. So, we hunted around, we had to do some thinking, and the question is there an algorithm that's going to make this process a lot easier so that we can do this not just with 4, but with thousands? And of course, the answer you already know, I suspect, is yes, there is. And it's called the deferred acceptance algorithm. And it was actually, I don't know when it was initially used, but it was initially discovered by economists, by Al Roth in, late in the, I guess it was the 70s or 80s, probably the 70s, can't remember exactly when, but it was actually being used in practice, this deferred acceptance algorithm, since the 50s to match medical interns to hospitals. And which is a nice illustration of the theorists, doing their work after practice. It's often the case that we think our innovative new auction format is something that's completely new, and sometimes it is, but often it's drawing heavily from something that's either already done or something very similar that's been done a long time ago. And this is just one example of that. So this particular deferred acceptance algorithm, as I said, it was seemingly discovered by Gale and Shapley in '62, but then Al Roth found that, well, actually people were using this in the '50s in actually much more complicated environments than just this marriage matching. So the deferred acceptance algorithm is also, like top trading cycles, extremely simple. Each iteration, an unmarried man proposes to the first woman on his list. So that's like me pointing to my favorite house. So it's exactly the same step as the same top trading cycle. But now actually the houses, rather than just pointing back to their owner, they actually now have preferences. So I point to my favorite woman, and the women point to their favorite men. Well, they don't point to their favorite men. They could. That's a different version. But they get this proposal and they decide what to do. They can accept the proposal, or reject it. And if the woman has accepts the proposal, then that displaces what she currently has. So it's a tentative acceptance, and that's why it's called deferred acceptance. So you're tentatively accepting the proposal, but if something better comes along, then there'll be a switch until this algorithm ends, and then, but it's going to, when it ends in a stable match. And what we're going to do is just keep iterating. So once we do this, we've got this, people, so men proposing and women accepting or rejecting. And when there's an acceptance, then they're sort of set aside and tentatively, and then those that are not, those who are still unassigned and have somebody on their list they want to point to, does. So in the second iteration, then all the men that have been rejected now point to the next woman on their list, and the woman can accept. And I can point to people that have already been accepted, and it may turn out that I'll be successful and that I will be preferred to this particular woman than who I was, than who she was initially tentatively attached to. So, and this version of the algorithm that I described is the men proposing algorithm, but you may have guessed that there's also a women proposing algorithm where the roles are just reversed. The women propose to the men accept or reject. And this, both are certainly possible versions. They have different properties. And but first, let's just continue with this men proposing algorithm. So Charlie points to Lucy, Linus points to Marcy, and Marcy accepts tentatively. Schroeder points to Marcy. Oh, and now Schroeder is worse than the list, so that gets rejected. So Schroeder's still out in the cold. Franklin then proposes to Peppermint, and Peppermint looks for Franklin. Yes, Franklin's better than being single, so not my first choice, but yes, I'll accept. So there we go. Is this, are we done yet? No, we're not done, because Schroeder still has somebody on his list, and he's not attached to anybody. So he prefers Lucy to being single, so he points to Lucy. So when Schroeder points to Lucy, Lucy says, wonderful, yes, I prefer you to Charlie. So Charlie gets dumped, and now Charlie needs we look at Charlie's list, because everybody else is already pointing to the preferred person on their list that hasn't rejected them. Charlie says, okay, well, I can't point to Lucy. I've got it. She's already rejected me. So I point to Peppermint. Peppermint is now thrilled, Charlie's first choice. So boom, they get together, and that displaces Franklin. And so now Franklin's got to look on his list. He's got Sally, so points to Sally, and Sally is, who's single right now, says, that's great. You're number 2 on my list, but you definitely are on my list. And so I accept. And we've found a stable match. Now, again, for the same reasons, this is clearly always going to converge, right? Because at each iteration, I'm always crossing somebody off a list. And the lists are finite, the players are finite, and so it has to end. So that's nice. It's got to converge. So that's sort of property 1, which is very easy to do. And there's lots of other results. So I'm just going to run through. I'm not going to prove these results, but I'll just run through them. The first is the order of proposals doesn't affect the stable matching. So I had Charlie go first and walk through them like that. It doesn't make any difference. You can change that order, no difference whatsoever. That's nice. Second result is the matching produced by the men proposing algorithm is the best stable match. So we don't get uniqueness anymore. In one-sided, we got uniqueness. Now there's many possible stable matches. And this one found the one that's the best for the men. So, interestingly, all these stable matches can be ordered by both groups. It's the best for the men. It's the worst for the women. So that perhaps is why, tradition has had men proposing to women, perhaps. Because it favors men. Now, interestingly, in hospitals, so the same is true when we have hospitals and interns. The difference is that hospitals can accept many, so they might have 4 positions. So, but this algorithm works just fine. It doesn't make any difference whether you want 4 or 1. That's you can see immediately that the algorithm would work in the same way. It would still converge, and actually all these theorems hold true in the case where the hospital needs many interns. That is, they're ordered. There's the hospital proposing or the intern proposing algorithm, and guess what? What did they use in the 50s? The hospitals proposed to the students. And that's not that surprising because the hospitals were the ones that are in charge of sort of designing the mechanism. And they managed to not only stumble upon a mechanism that's really nice, has really nice properties, but then they picked the version that is best for them, which is good. Now, recently it's been redesigned. And in the redesign, there's many new features, and Al Roth was very involved in that redesign. And I believe one of the new features is the students proposed to the hospitals. But the big thing that it handles in the new proposal is which isn't a proposal, it's been adopted and been used for many, many, many years. The big thing it handled is dual careers, because the students would actually sort of hook up in med school, and there would be a lot of couples, and the couples would want to be maybe not necessarily the same hospital, but the same city. They wanted to be in the same zip code. And so the innovation in the new algorithm accommodates these dual career interests, which is a very challenging issue, but it's now addressed. So what, another result, all stable matches, the set of people who remain single is the same. And that's that's a nice property. It's, perhaps to me, it doesn't have a lot of intuition, but it's certainly a nice additional property. Lots of applications of this. I've mentioned the matching of residents to the students to their medical residencies. It's used for residencies and all over the place. And so lots of applications, and Al talks about these at length in many of his papers. But one of the immediate questions, so we found that, well, it's not unique, but it always finds a stable match and converges finite time. That's really nice. So we can do it with, on modern computers, we can do it with thousands, and it will solve in milliseconds on a laptop. I mean, this is not a hard problem computationally. Doing it in your head might be hard, but doing it with an algorithm, this is trivial for a computer. But one thing that we had with the one-sided matching was strategy proof. It was a dominant strategy for the participants to truthfully report their preferences. That sure would be nice. So we'd like to be able to say the same thing here. Is it the case that the market participants want to truthfully report? And the sad reality is no. And Al Roth was the first to prove this, which is very easy to prove. You just have to come up with an example and show that the algorithm can be gamed. And it's very interesting that in fact we can say more than people want to game it. We can say exactly how people want to game it, and how you want to game it is for the accepting rejecting side of the market, the women in our initial example, for them to shorten their list. That's the way they want to game it. And you probably have a little bit of intuition why that might be the case, because essentially what it's doing, if you shorten your list, you can sometimes avoid being, you can eliminate some of the possibilities that the algorithm has. And as a result, the algorithm is forced to pair you with somebody you like better than somebody farther down your list. So that's the source of the gaming. And we can see it right here. So I don't know if you remember the allocation from before. Maybe if I go back very quickly, we can just see the stable allocation. So here was the stable allocation, where we had Charlie pointing to Peppermint, Linus to Marcy, Lucy to Schroeder, and Franklin to Sally. And what we can look at is, I think we're going to look at Marcy's very long list and deciding, well, maybe she wants to shorten that list a little bit. And because she's getting her third choice, and maybe if she shortened her list a little bit, she might do better. And in fact, we'll find out that that's going to be the case. So now let's shorten her list, eliminating. So she just says Charlie and Franklin. And now we'll run the stable match. Just going to run through it really quickly. And it's going to converge. Boom, it converged. And now Marcy ends up with Franklin. So she successfully moved up from Linus to Franklin through her strategic manipulation. She limited the flexibility of the algorithm in matching the men to the women, and that limitation forced the algorithm into basically prevented the Linus Marcy match, and as a result, it had to find something else, and so it went with Franklin. And all the, this is a one example, but it illustrates exactly the form that all the strategic manipulation on the accept reject side wants. You want to shorten your list, and you shorten your list from the bottom. Don't shorten your list from the top. So if you're advising somebody in this, don't tell them to shorten your list from the top. You want to shorten your list, shorten from the bottom. And none of the other women had any incentive to shorten their lists. I don't think. I mean, you'd have to go through, but I don't think they do. But in any event, that's the problem. Now, the good news is if we have a large market like the medical interns with thousands of hospitals and tens of thousands of students, then it's really difficult to see how you want to shorten your list. But that would be the one thing that you would want to consider, is maybe not making your list too long. Now, as a practical matter, I'm pretty sure they limit how long your list can be. I don't know what the limitation is, but it's something like 16 or something, 16 hospitals, some small number. And it's because they have to interview these people, and they can't, you can't have too many interviews. So in practice, the lists are short anyway. And the scope, what subsequent work has found is that the scope in these very large markets, the scope for manipulation is really very small. So that's good. So it's not as nice as in the top trading cycles case, but it's pretty nice. So pretty nice properties when there's enough competition, and enough competition is usually when there's a large enough market. Okay, looking at the time, I notice it's a good time to break. We've been going, it's actually a little later than I thought, because we started at 7 my time. It's almost 9. We only have a half an hour, and so, but still, I think we should at least take a 10-minute break to stretch our legs. Normally, I'll break sooner, but I think and try to split it in the middle, because I know it's been a long period. So let's come back at 5 after the hour to resume. Everybody can stand up, stretch the legs, and then we'll do the last 20 minutes. Good. Okay, welcome back. Good. So we were just discussing the deferred acceptance algorithm, and the natural question would be, well, okay, so the deferred acceptance algorithm, it finds a stable match, but it's not strategy proof. Is there a mechanism that finds a stable match and is strategy proof? And the answer is going to be no, that there is not. And Roth proved this in way back in '82 by finding an example that that showed that there's, I mean, certainly there are problems where there's no manipulation, but those are special problems. So he's able to find an example that shows that in general, this manipulation is a real issue. That it's not possible to find a strategy proof, a truth dominant mechanism for both men and women. We can have one side of the market without incentives to misrepresent, but that necessarily means that there may be an opportunity for the other side of the market to misrepresent. And that's all I'm going to say about matching, except for when we're thinking about auctions, you should think back that a lot of the basic results in auctions are going to be, when we have an allocation from the auction, and it might have particular properties such as efficient allocation and the competitive equilibrium prices, and that effectively is a stable match, and it can be reached through a iterative auction algorithm. So that's sort of a hint that there's going to be some, but it's also it's not. And yes, we can actually come up with an algorithm that's strategy proof in one-sided environments. But when we have a two-sided auction, so there's multiple buyers and multiple sellers, then it's not possible to have a strategy proof mechanism that finds the efficient allocation. So you can see already that there may be some connections in the underlying mathematics, and indeed there are. There's lots of parallels, and that's why I started with a little very brief introduction to matching, but Alex will pick that up on whenever next week, I guess. Today's Thursday, so it's hard to keep track of the days during a pandemic, but yeah, today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday, so Monday, I believe, Alex takes over. Okay, so auctions. Why would somebody study auctions? Well, the biggest thing is it's basic. Auctions solve a very basic economic problem. Who should get the goods and at what prices? And there are lots of applications of auctions. And so I don't need to harp on this. And they do it really well. If in a well-designed mechanism, you can get high revenues, high efficiency. You can control the information that the participants have in order to facilitate or reduce potential market failures. So it's really, very powerful. So just starting out extremely simply, and I'll try to go through much of this quickly, because it's things that I suspect most everybody's familiar with, but let's just take the absolute simplest setting of a single buyer. So I'm the seller, I've got this good that it costs me C to produce, and there's one potential buyer out there, and they've got a value V. So really what should happen is pretty clear. We should definitely trade. That's the efficient allocation. And then the question is, what should the terms of trade be? And since there's one of me and one of you, we basically have a bargaining problem. So this is a situation of negotiation, and there's lots of possibilities. The terms of trade could be anything between C and V, and that's going to allocate the gains from trade somewhere between all to me to all to you. And so there's lots of possibilities. And that's sort of unfortunate. And the thing about auctions is auctions are primarily about inducing competition on one or both sides of the market. And what that does is it makes the work of the economist much more important, because it actually reduces the indeterminacy that we have in this bargaining problem. And I actually, this is a little aside. So in 1980, when I was first became a PhD student at Stanford and was working with Bob Wilson, Bob had done all this work on auctions, and auctions just seemed like a great area. I actually had worked did a little bit of work with Exxon in their research park. And I was as an undergraduate, and I was talking to folks there about auctions and auction theory, and I was really interested in it. And I got to learn a little bit about what Exxon was doing. So auctions seemed like a really natural research topic for me. But then this was in 1980, and then Paul Milgram dumps on my desk his paper, Milgram and Weber. And, I read that, and then I said, oh, well, auctions is now a complete theory. There's no more work to be done in auctions, so I can't do auctions. So I thought, well, I'll do bargaining. There's a lot of neat work that can be done in bargaining. And especially, now we've got this technology of being able to model incomplete information. And so there's lots of interesting things to be done in bargaining. So that's what I did. And that was my thesis, was the role of time and information on bargaining. And all my early work was on bargaining. And then I even taught bargaining for a while. And that was all fun, and there's lots of neat things. But bargaining is an area where the behavioral aspects take prominence, and to a point where the economists often have a lot less to say. And so the way I looked at it when I was talking to MBAs about how teaching a course in negotiation, I came to the conclusion that the economics was able to explain about 20% of what was going on, and 80% was explained by these behavioral forces that I didn't understand, and no one else seemed to understand, at least at the time. And so that's why, after a while, and then you do something for 10 years and you want to switch. So then in 93, the Spectrum auction started up, and I got a phone call from MCI, which was one of the initial, was a big telecommunications company in the United States at the time. They don't exist anymore, but anyway, they were participating in the Spectrum auctions, and they wanted me to help them with both how should the auction be designed, and how should they bid in the auction. And so that was actually my initiation into Spectrum auctions. And as a result, then I just started doing, I realized that the theory was terribly inadequate. And what I thought was a complete theory for auctioning a single item. But there was all this work about auctioning multiple items that hadn't yet been done. And so, this application, and of course the Spectrum auctions are very much like that, because it's not like there's not one piece of spectrum that you're deciding who to send it to. There's a spectrum as a continuum. And so we can package it any particular way. We can slice it and dice it in all sorts of different ways. So it's very much auctioning multiple items and that are interrelated, and there's geography and bandwidth and all this stuff. So it was, this is sort of practice that then sort of got me jumping into auctions, and then which I was very receptive to, because all my early work was, some of my earliest stuff was related to auctions, and one of my very early papers, which we'll talk about, Dissolving a Partnership Efficiently, is really about an auction where the two-sided auction where ownership rights are held in different ways, more complex ways than traditionally. But that's a little digression. but just to mention that this bargaining problem is one of its downsides is economists have a lot less to say about bargaining than about auctions. So you add competition, and then all of a sudden the incentive problems start to go away, and the market starts to work much more like our ideal of perfect competition. And we can see that here in this example that here anything can happen in terms of the split of the gains from trade. So the theory doesn't really, it identifies that we should have trade, but the terms of trade are indeterminate. But now as I add buyers, so now I've got 5 buyers, potential buyers. Now there's a lot, if I've just got a single item, it's pretty clear now that I have to, a lot of the indeterminacy is reduced. I definitely want to award the good to bidder 1, but the price can't be too low, because if the price was below V2, bidder 2 would complain, right? It wouldn't be a stable match. Bidder 2 would step up and say, you can't, you were going to sell it to bidder 1 for V4, and that's just crazy. I'm willing to pay V3 for it, so sell it to me. And so in fact, this indeterminacy has been reduced. Now there is a stable match. And there's actually a lot of them. Any price between V2 and V1 is still a stable match, but we've limited the scope quite a bit. And of course, the famous one, the second price auction of Vickrey, is where we trade at V2, which is the buyer's preferred stable point. So we can actually order all the stable outcomes, and the most preferred stable outcome, the bidder optimal core point, is Vickrey's trading at V2. And the beauty of it is we can implement, here we see what all the values are, but we can implement Vickrey in a world where we don't know what the values are. And that's the whole beauty of it, that the auction can be this rich discovery mechanism of identifying the efficient allocation and the terms of trade without any of the market participants individually knowing what the market outcome should be. And it's a super simple mechanism. So, why auctions? It's it really is identifying good ways to allocate the goods and identify the prices. And the auction is basically doing the work that we need to do when we can't look at a picture like this and know the values. When we've got this incomplete information, then we have to have a mechanism that reveals the information in order to identify who should get the good. And the auction's really good at doing that. So that's the basic point. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with single item auctions, and I'm just going to briefly cover this a little bit. Eventually we'll move to multi-unit auctions or auctioning multiple items, because the reality is, here as a PhD student, I'm so naive because looking at Milgram's paper and thinking, oh, the theory is now complete, and his paper, it only looks at a single item. There's no mention of multiple items. And, even the big survey papers that came out later, like McAfee and Macmillan, almost the entire paper is about single item auctions. So it was very clear that the literature, with some exceptions, of course, for example, Bob Wilson had very early exceptions with his share auction paper. And so that's auctioning a divisible good. And so there were exceptions, but the theory was very, just at the infancy, not fully developed like the single item case. So when I've got a single item, then we can have an English auction like Sotheby's or Christie's. That can be our mechanism. Very good mechanism. Now it's done with a electronic clock, usually with discrete rounds, but getting continuous price quantity trade-offs. And of course, it's very simple when we've got just a single item. A Dutch auction is the reverse, where it's again a dynamic process, but we've got a clock that moves from the top down. So initially we've got lots of people interested in the item, and then the clock falls down until the point where somebody said, I'm sorry, I just had reverse and forward reversed, but in so an auction to buy, so an auction where I'm selling a single item, then the Dutch auction starts at a high price, nobody's interested, and the price falls, and then we identify the first person to accept. And that's done in the Dutch flower auctions, which is why it's called the Dutch auction. Now, unfortunately, in finance, if you were a finance person, you'd be confused by that, because in finance, they call the Dutch auction what we call the uniform price auction, they call the Dutch auction. And that was simply a mistake. Milton Friedman, that was proposing the uniform price auction for the auctioning of treasuries, sort of mistakenly, he didn't know too much about auctions, so he just mistakenly called the uniform price auction the Dutch auction, and somehow it stuck, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. But we're going to use Dutch in its proper form. Now, and it's also used in fish markets and anywhere where you've got something that's highly perishable. You've got a lot of things that are highly perishable. You got to sell them quickly. The Dutch auction is super efficient because you just have to, you see all the people, you just have to wait for somebody to blink and then it's sold. Whereas the English auction, the auctioneer has to do a little bit more work, seeing the demands from a whole bunch, and then finally the price reaches to a point where there's only one person standing, and then they get the good. We also have the sealed bid versions, the first price auction and the second price auction, both of which you're surely familiar with. And these are, of course, very related. The English auction is very much like the second price auction. It's a dynamic implementation of the second price. And the first price auction is a sealed bid implementation of the dynamic Dutch auction. So all of these are standard forms. They're all used. They all have extensions to multiple units, which is nice. Both multiple units that are, so a multi-unit auction where you've got a divisible good, and also extensions where you've got multiple products. And then that's really where the theory's been making the most progress in the last 20 years, is developing those multi-product, multi-item auctions effectively. So bidding behavior is going to be something that we definitely going to, equilibrium behavior in these mechanisms is going to be something we'll talk a lot about. English auction, especially easy. You just, you've got some, especially in Vickrey's private value setting, where you know what the item's worth, you just are going to stay in the auction until the price reaches your value, and then you'll drop out. And hopefully everybody else will drop out before we've reached your value, and then you'll win and make some money. And that of course is a dominant strategy, which is very, very easy to see. By dropping out, you get 0 for sure. And so you have no incentive to drop out before you reach your value. You certainly have no incentive to stay in once we've passed your value, because you may win, and winning at a price that's above your value, which would be losing. So regardless of what the others are doing, you want to hang in there until your value is reached. So it's very simple. Who gets the good? The guy that values it the most. What price do they pay? They pay the second highest value. Okay, which is exactly the same outcome as in Vickrey's second price auction, which is pretty neat. And the incentive argument is, basically the same. So it's very easy to prove that bidding truthfully is the dominant strategy in the sealed bid second price auction. And for the same reason, basically, if you bid your value, you've maximized the set of profitable opportunities in which you win the auction, and your choice hasn't impacted the price that you pay. So, so there's no issue there that you want to distort your bid in order to get better terms from trade. The terms from trade is established not by your bids, but by the second highest. And so in the event you're the winner, which is the only circumstance you care about, because you get 0 if you're not the winner, then you want to hang in there and make sure that you are you're bidding your value so that you get all those instances where you win when it's profitable, and you get none of the circumstances where you win and it's unprofitable. So for example, bidding above my value would expose me to some instances where I would win at a price that would be above my value, and I'd actually want to be a loser. And I can fix that problem quite easily by bidding my value. So that is a dominant strategy argument. Right? Because I've made no assumptions about the behavior of the others, just that the others submitted bids and the auctioneer sorted them, and that's all. Nothing, no assumptions about any information or whatever. It's totally dominant strategy argument, and it's depicted here, and you've probably heard it 12 times already in your life. So I won't go through it again because I already did it anyway on the prior slide. But that's the takeaway. So this English auction has this very simple, obvious dominant strategy. And that's the value of the English implementation. And we'll see that once we move outside of the private value world, then we actually have additional benefits from the dynamic implementation because it has richer price discovery than the second price auction. And that richer price discovery is going to reduce adverse selection problems, the winner's curse, and thereby enable the bidders to bid more aggressively. But it's nice in the simplest case, we've got this very simple implementation, which is just the second price auction. And the beauty of this second price auction is, it's efficient, it's strategy proof, and it is easy to extend to multiple products. It's just is, so it's super powerful. And the amazing thing is that Vickrey did this. So he didn't just do a single item. He actually did the multi-unit case as well in his initial paper in the 60s. In 1960, even before we had the technology of games with incomplete information. And he solved the problem and got the right answer. So, you know, very impressive. It's not at all surprising he got the Nobel Prize. Okay, so we shouldn't bid more than our value. We shouldn't bid less than our value. How about bidding our value? Let's do that. That's the best we can do no matter what. Okay, so dominant strategy, very nice. And as I said, we, you know, generally Vickrey auctions aren't used very much. Second price auction is certainly used in practice. You know, I would say quite often, not as much as a first price auction, but the second price auction, you know, where I actually think its application is the most useful is in when we're talking about multiple products and multi-unit demand and so on, where you can use the Vickrey auction and get efficiency, get truth dominance in very complicated situations. So that's where I use it. So for example, I use it when we're doing these really complicated package auctions. I use it at the end of the day to assign, so then the main auction has all this price discovery and identifies how much quantity everybody should win. But then when we're deciding about, well, do you want to be at the top of the band or at the bottom of the band, which it's, you know, the band's only from here to here, so it really doesn't make too much difference. So it's just, you know, it's this small thing, but Vickrey auction is actually really good for the winners to then decide as a process to decide whether they belong on the top or the bottom or in the middle if there's 3 winners. So that's where we use the Vickrey. We actually do something a little fancier than Vickrey. We do bidder optimal core pricing typically, which I'll describe later, but that's basically going one step further and has, you know, better revenue properties for the regulator. But the other place I use it is electricity markets, where there's the main show is energy and reserves, but there's this very fast market for which is called the regulation market for frequency regulation. That's all computer controlled equipment, and they're competing in auctions that are very fast, every 4 seconds, to keep the frequency exactly in the US at 60 hertz. I guess you're at 50 hertz in Germany. You're at something. And anyway, the equipment has to be exactly there, and because it's built for that. And this is again a market where where it's not that, it's a teeny market relative to the whole thing. It's got to happen really quickly. So it's got to be totally automated. And there's also there's multiple products, because it's you're offering capacity, sort of how much you can move up and down very quickly, and then you're also paid for the integral of your movement. You know, how much are we making you move? So there's those 2 dimensions. So we've got this multi-product, very complicated. We've got to do it fast, but it really doesn't make. It's not the trillions of dollars. It's the $100 million. So we don't want to spend a lot of time on it. So so that's where I've advocated for using Vickrey, and Vickrey works perfectly. It's super simple and it's really nice. Now, unfortunately, it actually has only been taken up in 1 market, and even there they had to trick the regulator a little bit to get them to adopt it. But it's and the other markets are terrible. They basically have serious problems. And so I think that it's something that we'll see more of. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, these simple ideas and the Vickrey auction, that there's been important papers written on why no one uses the Vickrey auction. And the reality is that's just false. People do use it. It's just its use is more limited perhaps, but it is very powerful, and that's a very good thing. Okay, I see I've run over, so I'm going to stop here. And next time we're going to then look at, so we've looked at second price in English. Next time we'll begin quickly looking at first price and Dutch. And then we're going to, eventually move to mechanism design and talk about and do some math, which I'm sure many of you will find fun, and perhaps some of you will find less fun. But in any event, this whole thing is going to be a bit of a whirlwind because we have such limited time with just these 4 sessions. So anyway, and actually, I hope today went okay. I know we didn't have too much back and forth interaction. Hopefully we'll have more in the future. It's certainly fine. If you ever feel like you've got a question, then by all means, type it in chat. I've got chat open, so you can put it in anytime you want. Or you can shut off your mic and just start screaming, and that's fine. As long as too many don't, if any, if it becomes a problem, it certainly isn't a problem now, but if it ever became a problem, I have the capability to put everybody on mute. So you don't have to worry. But anyway, the chat option's always there too. So we can do both. But this is, this is new to me. So I hope this was helpful. And I hope that, to the extent it's not, you can give me some suggestions on how to make it more helpful. But until tomorrow morning, I will say goodbye unless anybody's got anything they want to raise right now. Okay, well, let's get together then, bright and early my time, 7 a.m. for me and sometime later for you. So I think 4 p.m., something like that. Good. So thank you, and till tomorrow.